All right. Well, the Z6iii is out, and videos are starting to flow. And there was a specific video that Tony Northrup put out just a couple of days ago talking about the dynamic range of the Z6iii, and he referenced another video, a videographer channel called Photons to Photos, that they ran a dynamic range test, and then he wanted to run his own test. And it's created a fair amount of buzz, and people are talking about it. And since I am an owner of the Z6iii, I wanted to run my own tests. You might ask, why do I want to run my own tests when Tony ran his? There were a couple of things about his tests that I wanted to just verify. The first thing was he was taking a picture of a picture, right? His main subject was a magazine cover, not a real thing. So I wanted to do a little test using my Sony remote here. And I just wanted to take a picture of something real instead of a picture of a picture. He also did he zoomed in about 3.34 times on his particular test. And so, I don't know, a picture of a picture and then zooming in, it didn't seem quite kosher to me, so I wanted to run my own test. At the same time, to be fair, Tony did praise the Z6iii and said he loved it and doing a lot of video work with it. And I've done some shooting with it too, and I've got more tests and things coming out. But I wanted to address the dynamic range thing, and I ran a whole bunch of tests today. So I'm filming this in 4K, so you can kind of zoom in if you want. On some of the more important pictures in the presentation, I'll just put them in full screen so that you can see them. So here's essentially what I did for my my particular test and my testing methodology. I used I have both a Z6iii and a Z6ii, and I set up my 70-200 lens, pointed at my Sony remote subject here, and achieved proper exposure at 1/30th of a second. And I made sure both cameras were set up exactly the same. They were both on manual, f8, 100 ISO, VR was off, 14-bit RAW. And we ran test shots, 5 stops overexposed and up to 8 stops underexposed. And then I got all the results, and I wanted to look at them. So here are the results. You can judge for yourselves, but this is what I found in my tests. And I've got side-by-side comparison. So the first set of slides here are basically all the shots that I took straight out of the camera without any adjustments, just so you can see the slides. And the left side is the Nikon Z6iii, and the right side is the Nikon Z6ii, right? So first test. So this is 5 stops overexposed. And I'm just going to run through these. You can obviously pause the video if you want and stop and look at any of these in more detail. They get progressively, you can just see, again, straight out of camera. 4 stops overexposed, 3 stops overexposed, 2 stops overexposed, 1 stop overexposed, proper exposure, 1 stop under, 2 stops under, 3 stops under, 4 stops under, 5 stops under. At six under, I'll go back to 5. At 5 under, you can barely make anything out. And I want to make a point about 5 stops under. If you go to Lightroom and you try and adjust your exposure, it doesn't even let you do more than 5, unless you, which I did, unless you do a mask and do more, right? So I did some of that, but just to note, from the tests that I'm running here in general, what we're going to focus on is plus and minus 5, really minus 5 is the main one. So anyway, 5 stops under, 6 stops under, 7 under, 8 under, and it's a black screen. All right. Now, I went and took every single one of those shots and adjusted them to proper exposure so we could compare and contrast the Z6ii and the Z6iii in terms of dynamic range and how the shots looked. So here's the first one. 5 stops over adjusted. 5 stops over adjusted doesn't look very good on either camera. it was so bright, a lot of stuff got blown out. And so when I tried to darken it, that's just the best it could do. At 4 stops over, we can start making out some of the text, but again, all of the white areas of the remote here were just completely, they were so blown out that I couldn't recover them. Here we are 3 stops over adjusted, and we are starting to get a fairly decent picture. And I haven't, by the way, I haven't done any Lightroom adjustments with this. This is just straight out of camera messing with the exposure. There's 2 stops over, and again, they're starting to look pretty good here and no issues. And I'm sure I could take the 2 or 3 stops over and adjust them in Lightroom and get a pretty decent picture with either one of the cameras, the Z6iii or the Z6iii. 1 stop over, again, I mean, you probably figured 1 stop over, 1 stop under, proper exposure. These are going to look great, and all of them look good on both the Z6iii and the Z6iii. This is the proper exposure one. Here's 1 under. Looks fantastic. I don't see any difference between the two. 2 stops under. Again, there's no difference in the quality of these images. 3 stops under, and I still don't see any difference in the images between the Z6iii and the Z6iii. 4 stops under, they look the same. 5 stops under, at 5 stops under, the images are essentially identical. I don't see any dynamic range discrepancies or issues with the Nikon Z6iii or the Z6iii when you're at 5 stops under. Now, interestingly enough, we'll show 6 here now. Let's look at 6. At 6, you're starting to see a little bit of a change. Frankly, I kind of like the Z6iii a little more than the Z6iii because the colors have changed a little bit, but in general, they're still very, very close. But it was interesting when Tony ran his test, he picked this, this arbitrary number of 6.3 stops under. Now, why would he pick 6.3 stops under? I don't know how he ended up with 6.3, but if you go from between 6 and 7, at 7 stops, so somewhere between 6 and 7, the Z6iii does start having some noise issues and things kind of start, you're just getting some issues, right? And I'll blow these up so you can see them a little more on the screen. Past 7 and the Z6iii kind of just falls apart in a way. The color's all off, and there's just no real way to recover. But I would ask the question, like, how many images have you ever taken? I mean, I don't take any images that are 8 stops under. So anyway, just a note, I think from my perspective, 5 stops under or less, and you are good to go. And I don't see any dynamic range differences between the Nikon Z6iii and the Z6iii. Now let's look at some 5 stops under. So I want to focus on 5 stops with no crop. So this is the image, the 2 images that I took between the 2. And if you're not zoomed in 100% and you're just looking at these images, there's absolutely no difference between these 2 at 5 stops under between the Z6iii and the Z6iii. So then I was like, well, let's go in 200% and actually do a Lightroom edit on these images that are 5 stops under. Remember, this is the starting point. You can hardly even see the image. So this is the Z6iii edit and the Z6iii edit. 5 under. Z6iii, 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 Z6iii. Do you see any difference? I don't. Okay, now let's look at some clipping, and then this video will be done. Just a note, I thought this was just fascinating. So I took the original images before I adjusted them and just went into Lightroom and said, show me the clipping, right? So on the left, you see the Z6iii. On the right, you see the Z6ii. And at 5 stops under, the Z6iii shows virtually no clipping in the darks. And the Z6iii actually shows clipping. Let's go to 6 under. Everything's darker, of course, but again, the Z6iii is showing virtually no clipping at 6 under. And the Z6ii is showing in those darker areas around those buttons is showing clipping. And it gets even worse when you get to 7 stops under. So I don't know what Nikon's doing with the sensor, but they clearly have done something with managing clipping of the darks when the images are underexposed. So this is 8, and you can really see all of the clipping that's going on with the Z6ii, and again, none with the Z6iii. Now, that doesn't mean that when you bring this up that the Z6iii looks fabulous at 8 under. It doesn't, but it was just another test, right? Just to note there. And that's it. So hope you found this helpful. If you like these kind of videos, please like and subscribe, and we will catch you on the next video. Thanks.